Initially, the Situationist International focused on art making. In 1959, 3 artists held major exhibitions of their work, including Asger Jorn, whose modifications, or altered paintings, were shown at the Rive Gauche Gallery in Paris. These were second-hand, kitsch paintings by unknown artists, which were then overpainted by Jorn as a way of calling the activity of painting into question and the fulfillment of the self as expressed in action painting. In an essay entitled Détourned Painting, he wrote, "Be modern. Collectors, museums, if you have old painting, do not despair. Retain your memories, but deturn them, so that they correspond with your era. Why reject the old if one can modernize it with a few strokes of the brush? This casts a bit of contemporaneity on your old culture. Be up to date and distinguished at the same time. Painting is over. You might as well finish it off. Deturn. Long live painting." Whereas Jorn's response to the commodification of art resulted in modifications, Pinot Galizio's response was to create work that could be sold only by the meter. His industrial painting, rolls of canvas up to 145 meters in length, produced mainly by hand but with the aid of painting machines with special resins made by Galizio himself, could be draped along the walls of a gallery or stored in rolls. Theoretically, these industrial paintings could engulf entire cities. Pinot Galizio's industrial painting was subversive to the gallery system. Later, in the same year, Constant exhibited a number of his utopian models, part of his ongoing New Babylon project, at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. Inspired by unitary urbanism, in which the city is seen as a point of departure for new activities such as free play, these models were a plan for a new way of life in the automated world. Constant's work attempted to make connections between a creative urban lifestyle and the environment. Virtually all of his art-making activities were models for thought and recreation of the future.
Unitary urbanism means that the architecture shouldn't be done without looking to the behavior of the man. And so his idea, Constant's idea, is that if we have a man who is playing, who has a lot of time, everybody thought they would have a lot of time because of the industrial possibilities. If we have a man who is playing, he should have a city where he could live as a playing man. The city should have an image and the structure of something that is not fixed, that can change quickly, that can be where you have all the possibilities, like making light, rain, cold, warm. Everything should be in the means of the man who wants to play.
From 1962 on, the second loosely structured phase of the Situationist International begins with a shift from art making to films, books, and the journal as the central focus of the movement. Between July 1958 and September 1969, 12 issues of the journal are published and translated into other languages. Composed of articles which were sometimes signed but more often written collectively and anonymously, the journal was a critique of capitalist culture and urban life, enlivened with images pirated from the mass media. Besides writing, organizing, and editing the Situationist International Journal, Guy Debord directed 6 films from 1957 to 1978. These films, now removed from distribution by Debord, are mostly unknown to the general public and have rarely been seen outside of France.
What's so striking about Debord's films is that they are essentially a fabric of citations, both on the soundtrack, which consists primarily of phrases, sometimes extended phrases, taken from a variety of sources, everything from Marx, Nietzsche, Hegel, to commercials, law codes, newspaper articles, etc., combined with images that themselves are also citations from films, from newspapers, from books, from the history of cinema. Debord's cinema is strikingly reminiscent of films that an American public would be much more familiar with, given that Debord's films were never shown in America, even when they were being screened in France. I'm thinking specifically of the films of someone like Jean-Luc Godard. And this is no accident. Polemically put, I would go so far as to say Godard learned a vast quantity of what is most interesting in his oeuvre from Debord, something which Godard, as far as I know, has never explicitly admitted. But the parallels are striking.
The late 60s were politically and socially volatile times in Europe and the United States. Dissatisfaction with the Vietnam War, societal values, and political structures was building, particularly in the universities.
What exactly the situation has had to do with May 68, it's never been completely clear. It's never been very well understood. May 68 was kicked off by demonstrations, protests, denunciations, outrageous behavior at the campus of the University of Paris in Nanterre, Paris suburb. And the people who kicked this off named themselves the Enragés. They were Situationist followers. They were fans. They were trying to put the Situationist critique, which excited them, into practice. And people began, as the Situationists had fantasized and called for years, they began to stand up and talk. They occupied their factories, they occupied their schools, they occupied their theaters, they occupied their offices, and they began to talk in small groups or large groups, one person to another. There was a tremendous discovery of talk. It was a month of noise, and it was lucid noise. The slogans that covered Paris, that spread all across France, and over the next 10, 20 years have spread all across the world, were mostly Situationist slogans. They were either copied out of Situationist tracts, or they were put up by the Situationists themselves. The Situationists was that no matter how long some of their essays, no matter how serious many of their tracts were, they always believed that a good critique ought to be able to be boiled down to a single slogan, to a single new caption, new speech balloon stuck on an old comic strip. It ought to be comprehensible immediately to anybody. And that's what happened in May. You can't say the Situationists started May 68. You can't say they governed May 68. I think you can say this. Had there never been a Situationist International, there never would have been a May 68.
In 1969, one more issue of the journal was published. In that same year, the last conference was held in Venice. Further splits followed, and in 1972, the organization was dissolved. For the Situationists, 1968 proved a bitter victory.